Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 22nd of November. Today we have some updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with Kherson and Zaporizhzhia area. The front lines are stable, no changes. Today the Russians provided very interesting number from Kherson district. They reported that from the 22nd of November till 25th or 5th of November, the Ukrainians will try to redeploy around 1,500 soldiers and something around 2,500 of armored vehicles. So as you can see, just for 3 days, the Ukrainians are able to redeploy just 1,500 soldiers. If we are talking about 30,000 soldiers army in this area, that means that they need something around 20 or more days to redeploy the entire army in this area. From one side, this is not much because we know that Ukrainians need their army on some other front lines, but if we're talking about the fact that the Russians left this bank of the river Kherson a long time ago, so I believe that by that day the Ukrainians managed to redeploy at least 30 or 40% from their army that were located near Kherson. The Russian continues attacking, shelling Kherson. There are no water, no electricity in this town. The Ukrainians announced about the evacuation process from this town. They asked the civilians who left in this town to evacuate and not to stay there because it's very highly unlikely that the Ukrainians are able to support and supply this town with electricity, with water, to provide the Ukrainians food during the winter period. So anyway, these civilians had at least a chance to retreat from this area and to evacuate from this area of the territory of Russian Federation. At least in that case, the Russians promised them to provide them apartments, house, anywhere they want on the territory of Russian Federation for free. They just need to enter any region to provide some kind of certificate, and they would be receive some kind of flat land or something like this anyway for free. And of course on that territory they would be able to find a job and so on. Furthermore, I believe that as a refugee they would be able to receive some help from Russian authorities and so on. But now those who left there, they don't have any possibilities to receive any help from anywhere because the Ukrainian authorities are not able to supply and support the Ukrainians on this territory. Now let's move to Zaporizhzhia power plant, to Energodar, this town. As you can see, there are no icons in this area, but more and more Russian sources talks a lot about this town, about Zaporizhzhia power plant, and the Russian sources are saying that it's very likely that there is a very high risk and a very high chance that the Russians will be forced to retreat and step back from Energodar and to do something with Zaporizhzhia power plant. What does it mean? According to the Russian sources, there is a negotiation process right now between the Western countries and Russian Federation about peace agreement, about the future of these territories, about the future of this conflict. And the Ukrainians want and they required the Russians to leave Energodar and to leave the Zaporizhzhia power plant. We understand that the Russians can't do this for many reasons, and one of them is for many reasons, and the most important are the Russians during the peacetime will be able to supply and support Crimea, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson area with electricity from this area, from this power plant, nuclear power plant. Furthermore, anyway, they will be able to sell this electricity to Ukraine. Believe me, the Ukrainians will have to buy this electricity, and at least they will be able to receive some income from this territory. According to this income, they will be able to pay taxes, from these taxes to pay salary. At least, if we're talking about the balance, this region will be in plus with this nuclear power station. On the other hand, we understand if Ukrainians enter this power plant and move their forces there, they will create a siege, they will create a fortress there, and the Russians won't be able to return control over this power plant ever. And furthermore, this power plant will be something like a dirty bomb and some kind of real argument if the Russians ever start any special or war against Ukraine in the future. The Ukrainians will blow up this power plant and they will pollute the territory, all Russian territory on the south of Energodar. Of course, a lot of Ukrainian territories will be polluted, but as we understand, as we see, according to Ukrainians, they don't care, they don't trust anybody, and they don't afraid of anything in this world. Furthermore, but the Russians, they have their own options about these territories, about this situation. And today, some Russian sources reported that the Russians may agree for some actions about this territory, and mainly they maybe agree, it's some kind of version, maybe some kind of speculation, to return or to give control to this station under control of IAEA organization. So this power plant will be transferred to them. But the thing is that there are also a lot of options, and if you remember, IAEA, once they made a very big mistake, if you remember, during the summer period, these organizations were sent to Energodar to make some kind of inspection to get some evidence about artillery attack in this area. And while these inspections organizations were moving along this road, the Ukrainians made an attempt to cross the river and to take control over these power plants. So I believe that the Russians don't trust this organization anymore. So this is the reason why the Russians want to add their own things to this deal. And the thing is that the Russians, according to the Russian sources, are ready and agree to establish some kind of common control over the station with Ukraine. They didn't talk about the parties, about the parts, who controls 50, 40, 60%. There is no discussions about this or the real numbers, but I believe that the Russians would agree on some kind of common control, that maybe the Ukrainians will have 50% of this station, the Russians will have 50% of this station. They will split the income and profits from this station 50-50. Maybe the Ukrainians will Maybe this territory will be demilitarized. Maybe the Russians will be able to keep some forces there, like police or militia forces. Maybe the Ukrainians will be allowed to send some forces from their side. So let's say maybe the Russians will agree to create some common territory, some special territory under United Nations Organization control, under IAEA control, and under Russian and Ukrainian control, both together. Maybe something like this. But for now, I believe that there were no such cases in the history, and it is very difficult to predict and to understand what is going to be next as soon as the Russians allow the Ukrainians to enter the territory of power plant. If we're talking about the Ukrainians, the Russians are saying they won't agree. They want to take entire Energodar with power plant, and of course they would like to force the Russian to step back from this town for 40 or 50 kilometers from this area. And we understand that, of course, the Russians won't agree ever on such situation. Now let's talk about Zaporizhzhia front. This evening, right before I started recording this video, I got a report from the Ukrainian sources that the Ukrainians started offensive operation in direction of Tokmak. They reported that it wasn't some kind of ground battle, it was a very huge and big artillery preparation. So this evening, maybe it's some kind of speculation because I haven't received such proofs from the Russian sources and so on. But according to the Ukrainian sources, there is artillery preparation in this town. Tokmak is under very heavy artillery fire, and that means that after artillery fire, we're gonna see the ground operation and the attack of the Ukrainian forces. For now, no updates and no more updates, and I believe that maybe that was some kind of speculation. So let's see. Now we are moving to South Donetsk front line. The front lines are stable. The Russians are moving step by step, very slowly, trying to push the Ukrainians from this area. And as we discussed yesterday, the Russians moves in direction of Prichistovka. And today we got another report that Ukrainian commandos in this area were killed, were destroyed as a result of heavy clashes in this area. Furthermore, the Russians attack in direction of Vadiane. There was some kind of artillery attack. And as a result of these two attacks, the Ukraine lost around 50 soldiers and something around 5 armored vehicles. Very important updates are coming from Marinka. So there are very heavy clashes there these days. This is the heaviest and hottest point in Ukraine military campaign, as well as the same as Bakhmut, the same. So for now, I would like to discuss and in more details Marinka in more details. According to the Western sources map, we see the real borders, not the real, according to Western sources, the front line and the borders, the territory that it is under Russian control. According to the Russian sources, there are some differences. So let's discuss these differences in more details. First of all, the Russians controls a little bit more territories than we see right now on the map. And if we take a look at this map, if we take a look at the Russian sources map, we can split this area. We can split. There are 3 powerful fortification areas in this town. 3. The first one is in the north. This one. There is a very big building. This is a hospital. This is the hospital, and of course with underground like layers and so on, so it's very difficult to take control over this hospital. This hospital was built a very long time ago, and of course I believe that the Ukrainians prepared their fortifications in this area. This is this hospital, and of course we understand, according to this map, there are a lot of barriers like river, like water reservoirs, like small channels and so on. So I believe that the Russians won't be able to attack this, are not able to attack this hospital. And if we are talking about the Ukrainians, it's a very nice position to control the Russians' movement on the, let's say, like the corners or the suburbs or the corner area of this town of Marinka and so on. So from this territory, the Ukrainians control the Russian movements on the north and, let's say, the middle north parts of Marinka. Another fortification, powerful fortification, is located in the south. This one, as you can see, this is the residential area, but there are a lot of high buildings. This is high buildings. They are very compact, very close to each other, and there are a lot of trenches, a lot of fortifications, a lot of high positions, and so on. So this is very powerful territory, and it's very highly unlikely that the Russians are able to take control over this territory very fast. So the first one on the north, this hospital, this third one, let's say, on the south, and there is a second fortification. The second fortification is located in the middle part in this area, and there are a lot of this is residential area. There are a lot of big buildings in this town, but they are not so big as in the south. But anyway, this is the middle fortification area, and during these days the Russians reported that they managed to penetrate the Ukrainian defense orders, and they managed to take the middle fortification area. So this is information according to the Russians' reports. So for now, the Russians managed to split Marinka in 2 parts, the north one and the south one. As we discussed, it's highly unlikely that the Russians will be able to take control over this hospital. They can, but with very heavy losses. And the same situation about the south. If we are talking about the south, of course, it will take a lot of time to take this territory because of high buildings and so on. And the Russians, they don't want to lose soldiers. Nobody wants to die. We are totally in a different war when everybody tries to save their lives. So that's why the Russians have just one option: to continue their movement to the north west of Marinka, trying to move in this direction and to develop this situation, to split this territory completely. And by this, if the Russians are able to do something like this, they will be able to establish their 5 positions on the northwest part of Marinka. And from this area, they will be able to establish 5 control over these 2 roads that moves to the south of Marinka, to this area, to this industrial zone, to this residential area. And with help of this, of course, the Ukrainian forces who located in the south, in the 3rd fortification area, will be forced to retreat in direction of Pobeda. Even more, maybe the Ukrainians will be forced to move further to Konstantinovka. So this is the Russians' plans in this area. And if Marinka falls, you need to understand that Marinka is the focal point on this battle. For Donetsk, if Marinka falls, as you can see, a very, very big territory, very big square territory will be collapsed immediately. The Ukrainians will be forced to step back I believe that the Ukrainians will be forced to leave Marinka as well, because the Russians will be able to start development to the south. There are a lot of territory to move, there are a lot of trenches that it's very difficult to supply and support during this period. I'm not sure even about the trenches, if they are prepared, if the Ukrainians have prepared some fortifications in these fields to stop the Russians. I'm not sure about this. If we're talking about trenches and fortification on Donetsk, they were built a very long time ago. But if we're talking about this area, I'm not sure about this, because before this special operation, it was some kind of very back of Ukrainians, and I'm not sure that they have a lot of trenches there. If you take a look even at the Russian sources map, you're gonna see that there is blue things shows the trenches, but there are no trenches in this area. So maybe there are no fortification in this area at all. We're going to see some kind of tank battles and so on in this area, maybe. So if the Russians move further to the west, also from this area, they will be able to establish some fire control over these roads, and this will allow them to complete their operation with the north part of Marinka. So I believe that the only thing the Russians need, and they're doing this right now, is to try to move further, not to lose their territories, and to pin down the Ukrainians who are located on the north, let's say, and the south. So this situation about the Marinka, and after that, as I told, one of the most important towns will fall, and I'm talking about Novomikhailivka. This one, this is some kind of bonus in the Russian snack in this special operation. They need to complete Ugledar operation, but the Russians can't develop because of this small town Novomikhailivka. So we'll see. We'll see what is going to be next. As I told you, the result of clashes in this area in Donetsk front line from Vremivka tactical bridgehead to Avdiivka, the Ukraine lost around 170 soldiers and something around 18 armored vehicles. Now we are moving to Bakhmut front line. There are no changes in this area. The only important update, no, there is no changes on the map. There are no changes on the map. But the Russian sources reported, and the head of DPR reported, that Wagner's achieved significant success. Of course, it's very difficult to compare significant success from the Russian side, significant success from the Ukrainians. If we're talking about the Ukrainians, they're taking big regions. If we're talking about the Russians, they're taking significant success means to take another field or something like this, to different situation. But anyway, we can understand why. Is that the Russians reported that the Russians achieved significant success in direction of Klishchiivka. This town is located in the south of Bakhmut. This our Bakhmut. There is some kind of back in this area in the Western sources maps showing the progress, but the question is which direction the Russians chose to attack Klishchiivka. The general report said that in direction of Klishchiivka, but I believe, as we discussed, that the Russians were moving in direction of Andreevka, and from this area in direction of Klishchiivka. Everything as we discussed. For now, I'm not sure that the Russians are able to develop any offensive operation, let's say, in this area, like not from the south through Andreevka, but in the area between Bakhmut and Klishchiivka, for many reasons. First of all, is that the Russians will got under crossfire, and furthermore they need to cross some river barrier. But if we're talking about other things, you see that if we're talking about Andreevka, in this case, the Russians need to cross railroad and to cross like lakes, and it's not an easy job. And even if they are able to cross this area using infantry, I'm not sure how they're going to do this using, let's say, armored vehicles. Of course, it's possible, but it will take time. And these days, to stay some time on the open air, it means that anyway the Ukrainian artillery will get you sooner or later. But if the Russians move in this area, there are less barriers, but there are less places where the Russians are able to establish their fortification and just to hold this position. They will cut Klishchiivka. It's highly unlikely that the Ukrainians are able to use these fields. They are able, but I saw a lot of videos from the front lines that a lot of tanks, even armored. I'm not just talking about armored vehicles stuck in this ground, trying to get out of this area. It's very difficult to use fields, very difficult to use local roads, and To tell the truth, I won't be surprised if this road that connects Klishchiivka and Bakhmut is the only one road that it's possible to use to supply and support Ukrainian forces in Klishchiivka. If we're talking about Klishchiivka, we remember that there are around 3 mechanized brigades from different sides from Kurdyumov, Klishchiivka, who protects and defend this area. So no more updates about this situation. The Western source map has been updated a little bit. Also, the Russians reported they achieved some success in direction of Pitgorodnya. So as you can see, the Russians tries to increase their the range of their encirclement. So even if we try to update this map, it's like some soft update in softly, and the same situation with Kurdyumovka. You see that the situation became more and more critical for the Ukrainians. And of course, they still have a lot of ways to support and supply, but the Russians are getting more and more closer to the main arterias that the Russians uses to supply and support Bakhmut. Of course, there is a risk to be encircled. Nobody wants to be encircled, but we see what we have. If we're talking about Charlie Group, the Russians also developed some positions in Solidar. They attack some towns in this area, some buildings, some residential area, but without big progress. So as you can see, towns like Bilogorovka, Yakovlevka, and Solidar, we can say that there are no changes, just some changes on the ground that we can see right now. A lot of changes, a lot of interesting updates are coming from Sporna. Today, there is an icon. If you have access to this map, you need to check this video. It's like 12 minutes video, shows a real episode, like 12 minutes, and it was like a little bit speed up during the video of real battle in this area. That was terrible, to tell the truth. These trenches, I will try to describe to you. These trenches is under Russian control, and this area is under Ukrainian control. The Russians call this area, let's say, the Frontline Logistics Center. It's some kind of gas hub, and there are a lot of territory underground, a lot of basements, a lot of things, so it's possible to hide people, to hide infantry and so on. There is a forest, and the Ukrainians they have a lot of trenches in this forest, and the Ukrainians send their forces to this forest, and after that, from this forest, the Ukrainians try to storm these trenches, and they're trying to attack the Russians in this area. The Russians control these trenches, and even more, I would like to add that the Russians controls just this part of the trenches. The north part is in the gray zone, and the Ukrainians have possibilities to move their infantry. So the video was like the Ukrainians using like armored vehicles and one regular car entered this territory. They left car here, and something around 20-30 soldiers entered the trenches. And they were trying to move along the trenches in direction of the Russians' positions. They're like, if we're talking about the Russians, they were Wagner's and some LPR forces. There was a very close combo. The Ukrainians were trying to drop a lot of grenades. The Russians attacked and dropped their own. The Ukrainians were defeated. They asked for some help. Some help arrived, then they took these soldiers, then there was another wave. The Russians started artillery shelling. The Ukrainians were completely defeated, and they were forced to step back in this forest, and after that the Russians sent their Su-34 airplanes, and they burned these forests. I don't know who could survive in that. So while I was watching this video, I thought that I saw from the drones, the video from drones, and I had just one thing in my mind, that it was a suicide operation, and that the thing that we see according to the Ministry of Defense reports, that the Russians are saying that every single day the Ukraine losing 20, 30, 50, 60 soldiers. Sometimes I have some maybe not I can't say that I don't believe these numbers, but sometimes I have a lot of feelings about these numbers that the Russians provide. But after I saw that video, I suppose that the Russians were saying truth. The Ukrainians are doing dozens, maybe hundreds of suicide operations all over the front lines. They're sending so many people to death, and these people are dying in dozens and hundreds, tens every day without any understanding of this situation. And that this video from that battle completely show me this situation when they sent around 30 soldiers and just around 11 or 12 left without any progress, without any success. The only thing that Ukrainians managed to achieve is to drop few grenades, and that's it. And they lost one armored vehicles, they lost one armored, just regular vehicle, lot of infantry, very nice young boys were killed for nothing. And I believe that we can see all this situation all along the front lines. The Russians are not doing like this. At least I haven't seen such improvements or video that the Russians are running on like a meat under the bullets. I haven't seen such things. Now we're moving to Lyman and Kupin's front line. There were no active actions on the front line. The Russians reported that they attacked the Ukrainians. Before they started. They saw that the Ukrainians were trying to collected their forces to make some attack feast, but the Russians attacked before they complete these things, and as a result of those things, the Ukrainians lost around 90 soldiers and something around 15 armored vehicles. The same situation, the Ukrainians were trying to cross the railroad near Novosibirsk, but were defeated, and the same thing, the Ukrainians were trying to collect some forces near Stelmakhovka, but they were covered with artillery, were defeated without any progress. But maybe to stop the Ukrainians attacking Stelmakhovka is much better than to allow the Ukrainians, from Ukrainians' perspective, of course, than to allow the Ukrainians to do something as they did near Sporna, because there are much higher chances to survive being attacked at the beginning, but not in the trenches. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.